Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the 2024 campaign trail. This is the 10th episode, so get ready. We now have some 2024 polling between Jim Justice and Tammy Baldwin in the state of South Carolina. As you can see here, Jim Justice is leading in this poll by around 11 percentage points. A pretty strong showing, or a pretty weak showing compared to Donald Trump winning it by 12 points last year, or in the 2020 election. We categorize this as a safe race if these numbers were to occur in the 2024 election between these two candidates. We have some more generic polling, this time out of Connecticut, between Tammy Baldwin and Chris Christie. Tammy Baldwin is leading by around 14 percentage points. This is a safe margin between these two candidates, a Baldwin plus 14 in the state of Connecticut. We have some 2024 polling between AOC and Rick Scott out of Massachusetts. AOC is leading by around 34 percentage points. This is a landslide margin, a landslide D margin. As expected, Massachusetts is a very blue state, so we don't expect any Republican, with the exception of Charlie Baker, to make this close. We have some 2024 polling out of New Jersey between Tammy Baldwin and Rick Scott again. This is Tammy Baldwin and Rick Scott, not again, but just, this time out of New Jersey. Baldwin leads by around 14 percentage points. This is a safe Democrat margin. 14%, Baldwin plus 14 out of the state of New Jersey between her and Rick Scott. Welcome to the University of Richmond for the 4th Democrat Debate Night 1 coverage. Let's get started with our first candidate, Stacey Abrams, who was at the end, who was the lowest polling candidate out of this bunch. She had a below average performance. Her enthusiasm for the base wasn't as strong as it typically was. However, she did look strong throughout the debate, which we do expect her to gain support from this debate. For Roy Cooper, he had once again a strong performance after an abysmal performance last time. He now has a strong performance. However, his base wasn't too happy with him. His appearance looked weak throughout it. We don't know whether he will lose or gain support from this debate. However, we are leaning towards more that he will lose support from this debate. Next up, John Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania. He had a below average performance at the debate. His base was not as enthused as he might have hoped. He looked strong throughout the debate, of course, and we do expect him to gain some level of support throughout this debate. Next up, Michelle Obama. She had one of the worst debate performances of the night. However, her base was pretty happy with her performance nonetheless. She looked strong throughout the night. We don't know whether or not she will gain or lose support from this debate. Next up, Tulsi Gabbard, who had a below average performance at the debate. Her base was not as enthused as it typically is due to her performance. She looked pretty weak throughout the night. She was pretty sloppy, pretty tired. And we do expect her to lose some levels of support throughout this debate, or from this debate. Next up, Kamala Harris, who had a below average debate performance. Her base was not as enthused from this debate performance as her previous debate performances. She looked pretty weak throughout the night. We do expect her to take a huge drop of support from this debate. And finally, from the night, the frontrunner at center stage, Sherrod Brown, who had a above average debate performance, a pretty solid debate performance. His base was not as enthused from his debate performance, sadly. He looked pretty weak, and that may be why we do expect him to lose some level of support from this debate. Welcome back for night 2 of the 4th Democrat primary debate in the University of Richmond. The first candidate, the lowest polling candidate out of the bunch, is Senator Tammy Baldwin, who had a above average performance. Her base was pretty happy with her performance. She looked pretty strong throughout the night. However, due to post-debate polling, we do expect her to lose some levels of support from this debate performance. And it may be because of this, as Amy Klobuchar had a below-average debate performance. Her base was not as happy with her. However, she looks strong throughout the debate, and we do expect her to gain some levels of support from that same polling, so maybe the Rust Belt voters are transitioning from Tammy Baldwin to Amy Klobuchar due to Klobuchar getting more time to speak than Baldwin. Next up is AOC, who had a above-average performance. Her base was not as enthused as it typically would be from her performance. She looked pretty weak throughout the night, however, we do expect her to gain some levels of support despite this. Next up is Kirsten Sinema, who had an abysmal debate performance. Her base was not happy with her performance. She looked pretty weak on some of the issues, but pretty strong on a lot of the other ones. However, we do expect her to lose a huge chunk of support due to this debate performance. Next up is Pete Buttigieg, who had a pretty solid debate performance. His base was pretty happy with his performance. He looked pretty strong. He looked pretty strong throughout the night. However, we do expect him to lose some levels of support nonetheless, as he did get bumped down to the third pedestal, or the third, seating today. Next is Howard Schultz, who had a pretty below-average performance. His base wasn't as happy as they should have been. He looked pretty weak throughout the night. We don't know whether or not he will lose or gain support from this debate. However, we are leaning that he will end up gaining, but a little bit, not as much as some other candidates would, like Amy Klobuchar. And next up, the frontrunner of this night, at center stage, Mark Cuban, who had a pretty abysmal debate performance. His base was clearly unhappy with his performance. He looked pretty weak throughout the night. However, due to him being at center stage, we do expect him to gain support from this debate performance. We now have the results from the 2024 Democrat primary poll for the month of September. As you can see here, Sherrod Brown is leading the pack barely at 13.5%. Kamala Harris is shortly behind him at 13.4%. Roy Cooper is in third at 9%. Mark Cuban is at fourth at 7.5%. AOC is at 6.7%. Tammy Baldwin is at 6.6%. Howard Schultz is at 6.5%. John Fetterman is at 6%. Tulsi Gabbard's at 5.9%. Pete Buttigieg is at 5.2%. Amy Klobuchar is at 5.1%. Michelle Obama is at 5%. Stacey Abrams at 4.5%. And Kirsten Sinema is at 4.4%. We now have some polling results out of the Pennsylvania primary poll. At the top of the list is the senator from Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, who is currently leading by a huge amount, the only candidate to break 15%, thus he would win all of their pledged delegates if this were to occur. John Fetterman leads at 23.5%. Sherrod Brown is at second at 11.8%. Pete Buttigieg is at third with 7.4%. Amy Klobuchar is at 7.3%. Tammy Baldwin is at 7.2%. Stacey Abrams at 7.1%. Mark Cuban is at 5.9%. Michelle Obama is at 5.8%. Roy Cooper is at 5.7%. Howard Schultz is at 5.6%. Kamala Harris is at 4.3%. AOC is at 4.2%. And Kirsten Sinema is at 4.2%. We now have polling results out of the Virginia primary poll on the Democrat side of things. Kamala Harris is leading this poll at 18.8%, and she's the only candidate to break 15%, thus she would win all of their pledged delegates if this were to hypothetically occur. And second is Sherrod Brown at 13%. He is close to that 15% margin. And third is Stacey Abrams at 8.7%. Howard Schultz is at 8.7% as well. Mark Cuban is at 7.2%. Roy Cooper is at 7.1%. Pete Buttigieg is at 7%. Tammy Baldwin is at 6.9%. Amy Klobuchar is at 5.8%. Kirsten Sinema is at 5.7%. AOC is at 4.3%. John Fetterman is at 4.2%. And Michelle Obama is at 1.4%. We now have the New York primary poll results on the Democrat side. AOC is leading her home state by a good chunk. She's the only candidate to break 15%, thus she would win all of New York's pledged delegates, which would be huge for her campaign if this were to occur. And second is Sherrod Brown at 11.6%. Pete Buttigieg is at 8.7%. Amy Klobuchar is at 8.6%. Mark Cuban is at 7.2%. Stacey Abrams at 7.1%. Kamala Harris at 5.8%. Roy Cooper at 5.7%. John Fetterman at 5.6%. Tammy Baldwin at 5.5%. Howard Schultz at 5.4%. Kirsten Sinema at 4.3%. Michelle Obama at 2.9%. And Tulsi Gabbard at 1.4%. We now have polling results out of the Louisiana primary poll. As you can see here, Mark Cuban leads in this state in the primary polling, and he's the only candidate to break 15%. Thus, he would hypothetically win all of Louisiana's pledged delegates. Then second is Sherrod Brown at 11.6%. AOC is at 8.7%. Roy Cooper is at 8.6%. Howard Schultz at 8.5%. Pete Buttigieg at 7.2%. Stacey Abrams at 7.1%, Kirsten Sinema at 7%, Kamala Harris at 5.8%, Amy Klobuchar at 5.7%, Tammy Baldwin at 5.6%, John Fetterman at 4.3%, Michelle Obama at 1.4%, and Tulsi Gabbard at 1.3%. Welcome to the 4th Republican primary debate, night 1 coverage, held at the Thomas Edison State University. Let's take a look at the bottom tier candidates. First up, Chris Christie. His performance was an above average performance. However, his base, what little there is, was not enthused from his performance at all. He looked strong throughout it, however, but like other debates, we do expect him to lose support from this debate. Next is Senator Larry Hogan, who had a below-average debate performance. His base was happy with his performance nonetheless. However, he did look weak on a couple of the issues. We don't know whether he will gain or lose support from this debate. Next up is Kanye West, who had a pretty solid debate performance. Kanye West, a pretty solid debater throughout this year. However, he hasn't been able to gain much traction. His base wasn't too happy with him as he was spouting some moderate rhetoric throughout the night. He looked pretty strong as per usual during this debate. However, we do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate. Next up, Mike Lindell, who had a pretty below average debate performance. His base wasn't too happy with him as he kept saying something about Donald Trump is going to be reinstated and that the 2020 election was rigged. However, he did look strong when talking about these. Of course, he had the lowest amount of speaking time, even behind Chris Christie. However, we do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate. Next up is Governor Charlie Baker, who had a pretty abysmal debate performance. He had an abysmal debate performance. However, he did look strong throughout the night, but we do expect him to lose some levels of support from this debate. Next up is Ben Sasse, who had also an abysmal debate performance at the debate. His base was still happy with him nonetheless. However, he did look pretty weak. We do expect him to lose some levels of support from this debate. Next up is Rick Scott, who had a pretty average debate performance. It wasn't too good, but it wasn't too bad either. His base was pretty happy with him nonetheless. However, he did look pretty weak, as he typically does during a debate. We don't know whether he will gain or lose support from this debate. Next up is Governor Greg Abbott of Texas. He had a pretty below-average debate performance. His base wasn't too happy with him at all. with his performance, of course. He looked pretty strong nonetheless, and of course we do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate as he had the most talking time out of all the candidates. Welcome to the 4th Republican primary debate, night 2 coverage at Thomas Edison State University. Let's take a look at the top 10 polling candidates. First up with Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, who had a pretty strong debate performance. However, his base wasn't unhappy with his performance, but thought he could have done better. He looked pretty weak during some of the moments in the debate. However, we do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate. Next up is Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, who had a pretty solid debate performance. His base thought he did a solid job as well, pretty enthused from his performance. However, he did look weak on a couple of the issues, like, the electoral fraud that he was claiming during the 2020 election. However, we do expect him to lose some levels of support despite a good performance overall. Next up is Congresswoman Liz Cheney of Wyoming, who had a pretty solid debate performance nonetheless. Her base was pretty happy with her performance. She looked pretty strong throughout the night, and we do expect her to gain some levels of support from this debate. Next up is Secretary Ben Carson of Michigan, who had a pretty amazing debate performance of the night. His base wasn't too happy with him, though, as he was becoming very eccentric, very centrist as well. His appearance, he looked pretty weak, very calm, very quiet, waited his turn. We do expect him to lose some support from this debate because of this. Next up is former Ambassador Nikki Haley of South Carolina, who had an abysmal debate performance. Her base was not happy with her performance at all. She looked pretty weak on some issues, but pretty strong on others. Especially when it came to the issue of removing the Confederate flag from South Carolina government ground. We don't know whether or not she will lose or gain support from this debate, however, we are leaning toward that she will lose support. Next up is Ted Cruz, who had a pretty below-average debate performance, of course. However, his base was not happy with him, as comments back from 2021 from him saying that Texas should secede from the Union came back to haunt him in this debate. That's why they were not happy with him. However, he did look pretty weak, especially on that one issue, his comments on Texas seceding. Everything else he was pretty strong on, actually. But we do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate, due to post-debate polling. Next up, Governor Jim Justice of West Virginia, who had a pretty above-average debate performance. His base wasn't too happy with him, but wasn't upset with him either. It was a pretty okay performance in their eyes. He looked pretty weak throughout the night. We don't know whether or not he will lose or gain support, however, we are leaning towards that he will lose support from this performance. Next up, Senator Chris Sununu of New Hampshire, who had an amazing performance throughout the night. His base was pretty happy with him, however, he did look weak on a couple of the issues. However, we do expect him to gain some support from this debate. Next up is Tucker Carlson of California, who had a pretty solid debate performance. His base was pretty happy with his performance. However, he looked pretty weak throughout the night, and we do expect him, because of this, to lose a lot of support. Next up is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who underperformed massively here tonight, who had a below-average debate performance. However, his base was still happy with him nonetheless. He looked pretty weak throughout the night, and we do expect him to lose support nonetheless. Here are the results for the 2024 Republican primary national poll for the month of September. Ron DeSantis still leads the pack at 12.9%. However, Chris Sununu has taken second place at 12.8%. Jim Justice in third at 6.7%. And joining them in the top tier candidates is Josh Hawley at 5.7%. And closing out the top tier candidates is Charlie Baker, surprisingly, at 5.6%. Despite an awful performance, he is bumped up to fifth place. And next up is Ben Sasse at 5.2%. Tucker Carlson has dropped tremendously at 4.8%. Mitt Romney is at 4.7%. Larry Hogan's at 4.6%. Rick Scott is at 4.5%. Nikki Haley is at 4.3%. Liz Cheney is at 4.2%. Mike Lindell is at 4.1%. Kanye West is at 4%. Ben Carson's at 3.8%, Greg Abbott's at 3.7%, Chris Christie is at 3.6%, and Ted Cruz dropping to last at 3.3%. We now have some primary polling out of the Republican side for the state of Georgia. Ron DeSantis leads big by around 10 points in the state of Georgia at 21.4%, with Ted Cruz at 11.4%. If this were to occur, Ron DeSantis would win all of Georgia's pledged delegates due to him being the only candidate to break 15%. Nikki Haley is in third at 11.3%. Mitt Romney is at 8.6%. Ben Sasse is at 8.5%, Jim Justice is at 7.1%, Rick Scott is at 7%, Ben Carson is at 5.7%, Mike Lindell is at 4.3%, Larry Hogan at 2.9%, Josh Hawley's at 2.8%, Tucker Carlson is at 1.4%, Chris Sununu is at 1.3%, Charlie Baker is at 1.2%, Liz Cheney is at 1.1%, and Chris Christie at the last at 1%. We have some Republican primary polling out of the state of South Dakota. Ron DeSantis leads this state by 18.6% in this state. And if this were to occur, he would win all of South Dakota's pledged delegates due to him being the only candidate to break 15%. Ted Cruz is at 12.9%. Tucker Carlson is at 10%. Liz Cheney is at 9.9%. Nikki Haley is at 7.1%. Ben Sasse is at 7%. Chris Sununu is at 5.7%. Ben Carson is at 5.6%. Rick Scott is at 4.3%. Greg Abbott is at 2.9%. Larry Hogan is at 2.8%. Mike Lindell is at 2.7%. Chris Christie is at 2.6%. Charlie Baker is at 2.5%. And Kanye West is at 1.4%. We have some Republican primary polling out of the state of Virginia, and as you can see here, Mitt Romney is at 15.7%, and as he is the only candidate to break 15%, he would hypothetically win all of Virginia's pledged delegates. Nikki Haley is close behind, however, at 14.3%, Ted Cruz is at 11.4%, Larry Hogan is at 10%, Ron DeSantis is at 8.6%, Jim Justice is at 7.1%, Ben Carson is at 7%, Ben Sasse is at 6.9%, Rick Scott is at 4.3%, Greg Abbott is at 2.9%, Mike Lindell is at 2.8%, Tucker Carlson is at 1.4%, Chris Sununu is at 1.3%, Charlie Baker is at 1.2%, Liz Cheney is at 1.1%, and Chris Christie is at 1%. We're going to have Republican primary polling out of the state of Missouri, and as you can see here, Josh Hawley, underperforming our expectations at least, is at 24.3% of the poll, has support in his state, and since he's the only candidate to break 15%, he would hypothetically win all of Missouri's pledged delegates. Ted Cruz is at 12.9%, Mitt Romney is at 8.6%, Nikki Haley is at 7.1%, Ben Carson is at 7%, Ben Sasse is at 6.9%, Ron DeSantis is at 5.7%, Jim Justice is at 5.6%, Greg Abbott is at 4.3%, Rick Scott is at 4.2%, Larry Hogan is at 2.9%, Chris Sununu is at 1.4%, Tucker Carlson is at 1.3%, Liz Cheney at 1.2%, Charlie Baker at 1.1%, and Chris Christie at 1%. Congressman Richard Neal has confirmed his endorsement of Sherrod Brown during one of his rallies in Worcester, Massachusetts today. Richard Neal came out and gave his official endorsement to Sherrod Brown, saying that he's the only person in the Democrat field who isn't an establishment Democrat or a crazy progressive socialist. Never Trump candidate Ben Sasse has decided to withdraw from the Republican primary field in 2024. He has failed to gain enough traction to make the next debate without getting enough of he failed to meet the donation threshold, meaning he will withdraw from the primary field. Rhode Island Governor Dan McKee has came out to endorse AOC during a rally in Cumberland, Rhode Island today. The governor came out and gave his official endorsement to AOC, saying that she is the top progressive in the race and she will bring bold progressive ideas to the White House and to this country. Governor Mike Parson has came out to endorse Josh Hawley for president. His fellow Missourian Hawley had a rally in Wheatland, Missouri this evening, and the governor came out and officially endorsed him, only helping his chances in the state of Missouri. At a Kamala Harris rally in Baltimore, Maryland, Senator Ben Cardin came out and gave his official endorsement to Kamala Harris, citing that Kamala Harris is the top choice for president. She's the VP, and the VP should always be the first choice to become the Democrat nominee in his eyes. Senator Charlie Crist of Florida came out during a St. Petersburg, Florida rally, in a Mark Cuban St. Petersburg, Florida rally, and endorsed him for president. This is a very shock endorsement, as many thought he was going to endorse Kamala Harris, but he came out and gave his official endorsement to Mark Cuban instead, the first senator to do so, the first sitting politician to do so, as we can see here. Ted Cruz has shockingly ended his 2024 presidential campaign. His polling tanked after his comments about Texas seceding came out to the news, and he just can't do it. He failed to meet the polling threshold for the next debate, and he has decided to withdraw his campaign from consideration for the nomination. This is shocking, as he was once a frontrunner in the race, similar to Elizabeth Warren on the Democrat side of things. Chris Christie has ended his long-shot presidential bid, another candidate who failed to meet the polling threshold. He even failed to meet the donation threshold as well. Chris Christie will end his long-shot presidential bid, and he states that he will not be making an endorsement yet. Liz Cheney has came out during a Honolulu, Hawaii rally to hold a rally. She had an abysmal performance at her rally. However, due to this being her base, they thought she did wonderful anyway. She looked strong throughout much of her rally. We don't know whether she will probably lose support from this rally, however. Mark Cuban held a rally at in Las Vegas, Nevada, and he had a pretty solid rally performance. His base loved it. His appearance was pretty strong throughout the night, and we do expect him to gain some level of support from this rally. AOC holds a rally in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where she had a pretty above-average rally performance. Her base loved it, however. Progressives were screaming her name, hollering, clapping really loudly. They were just having a good old time. Her appearance was pretty strong throughout the night. We do expect her, due to her crowd being so enthusiastic, to gain support from this rally. Tammy Baldwin held a rally in Helena, Montana today, where she had a pretty solid debate rally performance. The crowd was very tempered, not too loud like the AOC crowd, very mild and natured. She did look strong throughout the rally, however, and we don't know whether she will gain or lose support from this rally, however. Larry Hogan held a rally in Carson City, Nevada today, where he had a pretty below-average rally performance. His base didn't seem too enthused with the rally at all. However, he did look strong throughout the night, or throughout the day, throughout the rally, and we do expect him to lose support from this rally. Tulsi Gabbard, held a rally at Cedar Rapids, Iowa today, where she had a pretty strong rally performance. Her crowd was very enthused with her, very loyal to her. She could say something terrible and they'd still cheer for her, it seems like. She looked strong throughout the rally, and we do expect her to gain some levels of support from this rally. Congresswoman Liz Cheney has suspended her presidential campaign for the presidency today in her hometown of Cheyenne, Wyoming. citing money issues as the main reason why her campaign can't go on. She's been closing staffing headquarters, her campaign headquarters, for weeks now, and many have speculated this was going to happen. However, we couldn't confirm or deny until now. She has withdrawn from the presidential race. And end of an era, Iowa to become a primary instead of a caucus. Iowa will become a primary this election cycle, becoming pretty much killing the caucus forever, as Nevada became a caucus in 2020 and in late 2021. Now Iowa, no longer a caucus, will become a primary. Here's the fundraising report for the month of September. Every candidate mentioned has met the donation threshold. Chris Sununu has 27,700 donations. Tammy Baldwin has 19,800 donations. John Fetterman has 16,500 donations. Amy Klobuchar has 5,500 donations. Rick Scott has 14,600 donations. Sherrod Brown has 15,000 donations. Stacey Abrams has 5,800 donations. Jim Justice has 16,600 donations. Greg Abbott has 10,900 donations. Mike Lindell has 7,600 donations. Ben Carson has 9,900 donations. Kanye West has 13,900 donations. Charlie Baker has 11,200 donations. Larry Hogan has 6,500 donations. Michelle Obama has 7,800 donations. Kirsten Sinema has 20,600 donations. Mitt Romney has 7,300 donations. Josh Hawley has 5,900 donations. AOC has 12,700 donations. Howard Schultz has 43,100 donations. Roy Cooper has 6,300 donations. Tulsi Gabbard has 9,000 donations. Mark Cuban has 10,500 donations. Pete Buttigieg has 23,100 donations. Kamala Harris has 6,400 donations. Nikki Haley has 7,400 donations. Tucker Carlson has 25,900 donations. And Ron DeSantis has 20,000 donations. And for the 5th Republican primary debate, the Night 1 lineup has officially been announced. Only 4 candidates will make it on the October 3rd debate night. Greg Abbott, Kanye West, Mike Lindell, and Ben Carson will be the 4 candidates at the on the primary debate stage. We would have had 2 other candidates, but Ben Sass and Liz Cheney had decided to withdraw from the debate, so it's just these 4 candidates on night 1. However, on night 2, the top 10 candidates will meet each other on the October 4th debate. It'll be Nikki Haley, Larry Hogan, Tucker Carlson, Josh Hawley, Chris Sununu, Ron DeSantis at center stage, Jim Justice, Charlie Baker, Mitt Romney, and Rick Scott. And for the 5th Democrat debate lineup on October 10th, it will be Stacey Abrams, Pete Buttigieg, John Fetterman, Roy Cooper at center stage, AOC, Tulsi Gabbard, and Amy Klobuchar. For the night 2 lineup on October 11th, we will see Kirsten Sinema, Howard Schultz, Mark Cuban, Roy Cooper at center stage. That's a typo, I think so. I think that's a typo. Kamala Harris, Tammy Baldwin, and Michelle Obama. On the 7th Democrat primary debate, it will be held on November 7th and 8th. It will be held in Boston, Massachusetts at Harvard University. The requirements: you need 6,000 unique donors, you need 4% or more in the national average, 4% or more in 2 state polls, and it will be hosted by the New York Times. For the 7th Republican primary debate, it will be held on November 14th and 15th. It will be held in Hartford, Connecticut at the Trinity College. Requirements being you need 6,000 unique donors, top 16 in the national average by October 30th, and you need 4% or more in 2 state polls or more. And we have 14 Republicans and 14 Democrats currently in the race for the White House. We have cut the field substantially since the beginning of this series. And let's take a look at the Republican candidates so far. We have Chris Sununu, Rick Scott, Jim Justice, Greg Abbott, Mike Lindell, Ben Carson, Kanye West, Charlie Baker, Larry Hogan, Mitt Romney, Josh Hawley, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and Tucker Carlson. And on the Democrat side, we have Tammy Baldwin, John Fetterman, Amy Klobuchar, Sherrod Brown, Stacey Abrams, Michelle Obama, Kirsten Sinema, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Howard Schultz, Roy Cooper, Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Buttigieg, Mark Cuban, and Kamala Harris. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry that it sounds pretty bad. I forgot to plug my mic in and I don't feel like re-recording. But there is a new poll in the description below. Don't forget to go fill that out. This is the Chaotic One saying peace, and don't forget to go follow my Twitter at ChaoticPolitics.